So let's talk about Yuval Noah Harari's Nexus. What he's done here is create this incredible, sweeping history of, well, information networks. These are the invisible systems that really run our world, right? They coordinate our beliefs, our behaviors, and even our power structures.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to trace this whole story right from the beginning, the very first human networks. Then we'll see how those tiny, simple connections paved the way for these huge imperial systems. After that, we'll leap forward to the modern era, to the information engine that basically built the world we live in now. And finally, we'll land on what Harari calls the Great Rewiring, which is happening right now, as we speak.
So at the very heart of this book is a really bold thesis from Harari, and it basically sets the stage for everything. He argues that if you look at human civilization, it's really just the story of us building more and more complex information networks. But here's the kicker. He says AI is the first network in all of history that doesn't need humans at its center. Think about that for a second.
All right, so where does a story this big even begin? Well, we have to rewind way, way back. We're talking about the very first human networks. And these weren't built with silicon or fiber optics, no. They were built with something much more fundamental: gossip, stories, and myths.
Harari kicks things off with this really provocative idea. He says, our earliest advantage as a species, it wasn't tools, it wasn't our strength, it was our ability to exchange social information. Picture this, around ancient campfires, early humans were sharing gossip. And Harari frames this as the very first decentralized information network.
Now, this wasn't just idle chatter, okay? This was a full-on survival technology. I mean, think about it. This network helped people navigate their incredibly complex social world. It answered the most important questions, like who can I actually trust, or who's a danger to our group? It was basically a distributed, real-time system for managing social risk.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Harari draws this fascinating parallel between that ancient gossip network and, well, modern social media. When you look at the core functions, they're almost identical: managing your reputation, building alliances, figuring out who's in your group. It's the same stuff. And it wasn't just gossip either. Early humans used stories to pass on vital knowledge about the world, about dangers, and basically about how to act.
But then something huge happened, the real game changer. Around 70,000 years ago, we humans started sharing stories about things that weren't even real. We developed this incredible ability to create and believe in what Harari calls fictional constructs. Gods, spirits, shared moral codes. And this, he argues, was the single biggest innovation that allowed us to build information networks at a massive scale.
The power of these shared myths was, well, it was completely transformative. All of a sudden, you could cooperate with thousands of total strangers, not just your 50 closest relatives. Why? Because you both believed in the same god or the same mythical ancestor. These stories were like a shared operating system for society. Harari even calls them the first viral content, ideas that spread and totally reshaped human behavior on a scale never seen before.
Okay, so networks of myths and gossip are powerful, but they have their limits. I mean, what happens when your society blows up from a few thousand people to millions? You need something a lot more robust. And that brings us to the next major evolution in our story: the building of huge imperial systems, all thanks to writing, money, and centralized power.
So, as societies got bigger and bigger, gossip just wasn't enough to hold things together. This was the central challenge. And the solution was a piece of technology that completely changed everything. It allowed us to store information outside of our own brains. Of course, I'm talking about writing.
And what's so fascinating here is that the first writing systems we know of, like cuneiform, they weren't used for poetry or epic sagas. No, they were for accounting, just keeping track of stuff. But this super practical tool quickly became the backbone for all of administration. It made things like taxation and legal codes possible. And this had a massive impact on power, right? Authority shifted away from the charismatic storyteller and toward the bureaucrat, the person who controlled the archives.
I love this analogy Harari uses. He calls writing humanity's very first cloud storage. It was the first time we could make information stick around for the long term on a huge scale.
All right, next up is money. And according to Harari, money is probably humanity's most successful shared fiction ever. The only reason it works is because we all collectively believe it has value. It's this incredible tool that allows total strangers, people with no shared culture or language, to cooperate. It standardizes the idea of value across both time and space.
When you really stop and think about it,
Money is nothing more than an information network. Every single coin, every bill, it's encoding these abstract ideas. Things like trust, debt, obligation, future promises, and it was this incredibly powerful information system that unlocked, well, pretty much everything. Long-distance trade, credit, global markets, even colonial expansion.
So, with these new tools, writing and money, two huge forces emerged to build the first truly global information systems: empires and religions. Now, they worked a bit differently. Empires used physical stuff, like roads and laws. Religions used more abstract tools, like scriptures and rituals. But, and this is the key, they both relied on the exact same model: a top-down, hierarchical network where some central authority, a king, a pope, broadcasted information out to the masses. And for centuries, these top-down systems completely dominated human society. But then, something new emerged. A totally different kind of information engine. One that would fundamentally rewrite the rules of the world. And it was born from this powerful cocktail of science, capitalism, and industry.
The scientific revolution brought with it a radically new kind of information system. I mean, it completely flipped the old model on its head. Instead of being based on what some authority figure told you, it was based on evidence. Instead of punishing people for not knowing things, it actually rewarded admitting ignorance and asking questions. It was a distributed network, no single pope, no single king in charge, and it was designed to constantly test and update itself.
Then you have capitalism, which Harari frames as a kind of prediction network, one that's built entirely on trust in future growth. And it created this incredibly powerful feedback loop with science. It goes like this. Science creates new innovations. Those innovations fuel economic growth. And then that growth turns around and funds, you guessed it, more science.
And a lot of us think of the Industrial Revolution as being about mechanizing labor, right? Building factories. But Harari argues it was just as much about mechanizing information. All of a sudden, you have telegraphs making instant communication across continents possible. Railways actually forced us to standardize time. Mass-produced newspapers created this idea of a shared national story. And all of this complexity required huge new bureaucracies just to manage the fire hose of information.
And that brings us pretty much to today. That old industrial engine has given way to something totally new. Something that is rewiring our entire world at a mind-boggling speed. This is the era of digital networks and, for the very first time in history, non-human agents.
The digital age really marks this profound shift from a world of atoms to a world of bits. Information isn't tied to a physical thing anymore, like a book or a scroll. It's virtual, and you can copy and change it infinitely. The internet gave us a decentralized global network. And then social media, well, it brought back our oldest information technology, gossip, but scaled it up to a planetary level.
But now we get to what Harari sees as the most crucial point of all. He says AI is not just another upgrade. It's not just a faster internet or a better computer. It is an entirely new kind of agent that is now entering the system. Think about what these AI systems can do. They can process vast amounts of information. They can generate new stories and narratives. They can interpret our behavior, influence our beliefs, and even make decisions on their own. And here's the key. They can do all of this without what we would call human understanding. This just shatters the pattern of every single network that came before it because every single one of them required humans right at the center.
And this is where we get to Harari's great warning. What happens when our culture is being shaped by a storyteller that isn't human? What happens when a political actor that isn't human can influence our elections, or when a non-human economic agent starts allocating resources? His argument is that AI is the first system ever created that is capable of hacking human psychology at scale, and in doing so, fundamentally rewiring the way we even think.
So, what's the answer to all this? Look, Harari doesn't pretend to have one, but he does end with this urgent call for collective wisdom. He's talking about global governance, about building ethical frameworks to guide these incredibly powerful new agents. You know, for 70,000 years, from the very first campfires all the way to the cloud, the story of our civilization has been our story to tell. The huge question facing us now is, what happens when we're no longer the only ones telling it?